Chapter 1. Lia. The smell of spilled Cabernet and stale cigar smoke was a noxious mix that usually defined a Friday night at the Velvet Spoon. But the silence tonight was thick, suffocating, and far more dangerous than any sound. It wasn't a hush. It was the sound of fear freezing still. My ears were still ringing from the smash of the silver tray as it hit the terracotta tiles. Not just the tray, but a half-dozen dirty martinis, 2 plates of the veal scallopini special, and my composure. They'd laughed, 3 of them, 3 spoiled, arrogant men in suits that screamed, "Old money, no sense." They were the Ricci brothers, and they'd made a show of stepping into my path, forcing the collision. "Watch where you're going, Cara," the one named Marco had sneered, using the term of endearment as a razor. He'd reached out to grab my wrist, but I'd been trained to be faster than a clumsy waitress looked. I dodged him, dropping the tray instead. Now all 3 Ricci brothers stood there, their faces slowly draining of color, their laughter silenced into dry, panicked swallows. They weren't looking at the broken plates, or at me, the waitress they'd just humiliated. They were looking past me. I didn't dare turn around, I didn't need to. I could feel the change in the atmosphere, the sudden drop in temperature, the absolute, undeniable pull of pure, contained power. The air had become too thin to breathe. My heart hammered against the silk of my uniform, a frantic, desperate bird in a cage I'd built myself. For the past 2 years, I'd played the role of Lia Costa, the shy, pale, easily flustered girl who poured mediocre wine for big spenders and kept her head down. It was my cover, my freedom, my arrangement. It was the only way I could feel remotely normal after the wedding. But my cover was now ripped to shreds. The restaurant doors had clicked shut, a heavy, final sound, and the only people moving were the 2 hulking men in plain dark suits who had emerged from the back office and taken positions by the main exit. Those weren't bouncers, those were sentinels. Then, the voice. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a low, resonant rumble that demanded silence and obedience, the sound of a judge handing down a verdict. "Apologize to my wife." Marco Ricci went white. His jaw fell open, and his eyes flicked wildly between my back and the man who had just spoken. "Cian? What are you saying? She's a waitress. It's just a girl, an accident." "It was not an accident," the voice corrected, each syllable a heavy weight dropped on a glass surface. "You harassed her. You made her fall, and you humiliated her, in my establishment." Yes, his establishment. Cian Volkov, the unseen, untouchable mafia boss of the entire eastern seaboard, owned the building, the business, and technically me. He was my husband. We were married in a cold, brutal peace treaty between his family and mine. My father, the fool, selling me for protection. We had rules, separate homes, separate lives, and absolute secrecy about our connection. I was to be an invisible shield, not a visible asset. I finally forced myself to turn. Cian Volkov stood 5 feet behind me. He was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed not in a suit, but in a simple, perfectly tailored dark navy coat that looked more powerful than any uniform. His face was a masterpiece of lethal beauty, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of a winter storm. But it was the pure, terrifying focus in those eyes that was the hook. They weren't angry. They were dead calm, fixed solely on the men who had insulted me. It was the first time I had seen him genuinely protective of me. And the unexpected surge of heat, a thrill mixed with deep, mortifying fear, made my knees weak. "Apologize." "Now," Cian repeated. The silence returned, but this time it was electric, waiting for the crack of thunder. Marco's brother, the bravest of the 3, swallowed hard and finally stammered out, We are sorry, miss." We didn't know. You didn't know you shouldn't disrespect a woman? Cian's lip curled in a fleeting, contemptuous sneer. That is the greater issue. He looked past them, his gaze sweeping the now empty room. The staff were hiding. The few remaining customers had miraculously vanished. He then looked at me. His gaze was analytical, assessing, and absolutely devoid of the warmth that his recent fury had held. My mistake was allowing myself to be seen, I thought bitterly. Clean this up, Lia, he instructed, his voice now back to its normal, detached drone, the one he used when addressing a subordinate. Then wait for me in the office. My throat tightened. I can finish my shift, Cian. I'm fine. Lie, I'm terrified. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took 2 long strides, closed the remaining distance, and gripped my chin, not roughly, but firmly, forcing my eyes up to meet his. The sexual tension was a physical pressure, hot and immediate, despite the fear. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger. Your shift is over, wife, he murmured, his breath a warm whisper against my cheek that felt far too intimate for a man who kept a mile between us. He let go and turned, walking back toward the office he rarely used. I stood there, shaking, the ruined martinis glistening on the floor. I wasn't scared of the Ricci brothers anymore. They were already being escorted out, their futures suddenly very, very bleak. I was scared of him, of the fact that he had acted, of the sudden, brutal rupture in our delicate arrangement. I did what I was told, the adrenaline making my movements stiff and unnatural. When I finally walked into the plush, wood-paneled office, Cian was standing by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked street. He didn't turn around. They deserved worse, I heard myself say, surprising us both with my lack of shyness. He finally turned, his expression unreadable. They will receive worse. Their father will apologize to me, on his knees, for his son's disrespect to my name. Not for the disrespect to me, I pointed out, walking to the leather sofa. It's always about the power play. Of course it is, he said, sounding genuinely confused as to why I'd ask. That is the arrangement you agreed to. He took a step closer, his hands braced on the edge of the large mahogany desk, his body leaning slightly towards me. The tension in the small room was thicker than the cigar smoke from earlier. The arrangement, he continued, his eyes drilling into mine, has changed. Your father, Salvatore, is making moves that suggest the treaty is failing. You are no longer safe here. My stomach dropped. But my job is my cover. It's been working. It was compromised tonight. The entire city will know by tomorrow that Cian Volkov's wife is a waitress they can insult at will. It is a humiliation I will not bear. You are too valuable to be left exposed. He pushed off the desk and walked to the wall safe, pulling out a heavy black leather bag. So what's the new plan? I asked, my voice small. He locked the safe, picked up the bag, and gave me a look that was part command, part warning. You are moving in with me. Immediately he paused, letting the words sink in. For security, we will live as a real married couple. You will play the wife, Lia, the one who is seen, the one who is envied, the one who is untouchable. The rules of this marriage are about to change entirely. I stared at the black bag, then back at his storm-colored eyes. The separate lives, the cold distance, it was over. I was trading my flimsy security for a golden cage, and the thought, terrifyingly, felt like destiny. The wife. The true wife. Fine, I said, forcing a brave smile. But if you think I'm going to let you pick out the throw pillows, you don't know me very well, Mr. Volkov. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of amusement crossed his face, a ghost of a smile quickly suppressed. Banter. It was the first sign of life I'd seen from him outside of rage. Pack a bag, Lia, he said, emphasizing my name with a dangerous warmth. We leave in 20 minutes.
Chapter 2. Cian. The hum of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was the only sound permitted to exist in the car. A deep, expensive thrum that wrapped itself around the silence like velvet on cold steel. I hadn't looked at her since we left the Velvet Spoon. My focus was on the cityscape rushing past. A collection of lights and shadows I owned, controlled, and protected with brutal efficiency. Lia sat next to me, rigid, staring straight ahead. I could feel the tension radiating off her, a palpable heat that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with fear and defiance. She'd offered that smart, sarcastic comment about the throw pillows, a small, foolish act of rebellion, and it had been the most compelling thing she'd done in 2 years. It was inconvenient. I preferred her shy. Shy was predictable. I clenched my jaw, reviewing the timeline in my head. The incident with the Ricci brothers had been a spark, a necessary catalyst, but the decision to move her had been made 3 days ago. The peace treaty was dead. Her father, Salvatore Costa, had grown too bold, too desperate. He thought the treaty meant equality. I had meant it as a 2-year probation period before I absorbed his entire operation. His latest business moves were acts of war, and in war, you secure your most valuable assets. Lia was an asset, the ultimate non-negotiable insurance policy. As long as she bore my name, Salvatore couldn't touch my structure without consequences that made total annihilation look like a day trip. But an asset shouldn't be dropping veal scallopini on the floor of my restaurant while being propositioned by drunken fools. The wife. I hated the word. A sharp memory of the wedding day, 2 years prior, cut through my control. It was not a wedding. It was a transaction witnessed by lawyers and a terrified priest. She had worn white, a sickeningly beautiful irony, and had looked like a ghost. She is your wife now, Cian. By all laws, religious and civil, you keep her safe, and I keep my territories. Salvatore had clinked a champagne glass, his smile too wide. She is my insurance, Salvatore. I'd corrected him coldly. The rules are simple, Lia. You live in a secure apartment. You keep a low profile. You do not speak my name, and you do not speak of this arrangement. We exist separately. You will never want for anything, but you will never want for me. I had been brutally clear. The arrangement was for my protection, not hers. I couldn't afford to care about a woman, especially not the daughter of a man I intended to eventually destroy. The one saving grace was that she hadn't fought the distance. She had embraced the isolation, finding refuge in her anonymous life as a waitress. It suited us both, until tonight. The driver is turning off the highway. Lia's voice cut through my thoughts, brittle but steady. Are we going to your penthouse or? The estate, I stated, clipping the words. The penthouse is too exposed. The estate is impenetrable. You will be safe there. Safe? Or merely contained? The question was quiet, but it landed like a well-aimed punch. I finally turned my head. My eyes narrowed on her profile. The streetlight illuminated her features, the delicate bone structure, the slightly smudged mascara, the slight tremor in her lower lip. She looked fragile, but there was that steel spine showing again. Both, I admitted, allowing a fraction of honesty. You are my responsibility now, both as a tactical resource and, publicly, as my wife. The world will see us as united. That requires absolute control over your environment. And over me? Yes, Lia. over you. Your life as a waitress is over. You will learn to manage my household, host my associates, and look like you enjoy being Mrs. Volkov. Your job now is to reinforce my power, not undermine it. The tension thickened to a near solid thing. The air between us felt charged, a live wire running down the center console. Her lips parted as if to argue, but she simply nodded, her eyes flashing briefly with resentment. That was better than compliance. Compliance bored me. We pulled up to the main gate of the estate, a fortress of black wrought iron, stone walls, and discreet cameras. The massive doors swung inward, revealing the sprawling property. "I won't be sleeping in the servants' wing, Cian," she stated flatly as we drove up the long, tree-lined path. I almost smiled. "No, I am not a savage. And I am not a fool." I paused until the car stopped in front of the manor's granite steps. "For security, for optics, and for the sake of the narrative, you will be sleeping in the room adjacent to mine. The connecting door will remain unlocked, so my security detail can ensure your constant protection." She inhaled sharply. "Unlocked?" "Yes. You are my most valuable piece, Lia. I need to be able to access you or have my men access you instantly. Don't mistake proximity for intimacy. It is a tactical decision." I opened my door and stepped out, letting the cold air clear my head. My head capo, Dante, met me at the door. "Signor Volkov, the North Wing is prepared. All staff has been vetted and briefed. The new security detail is in place." "Good. Have the staff unpack that bag and prepare the master suite for my wife's immediate use," I instructed, nodding toward the small black bag I'd given her in the restaurant. I saw Lia flinch at the casual reference to the master suite, as if I was announcing they were to share a room. Let her sweat a little. This forced cohabitation was a psychological weapon against us both. I led her past the grand, silent foyer and up the sweeping staircase. The house was enormous, but the North Wing was my sanctuary. It was minimalist, modern, and insulated against noise and intrusion. I opened the heavy oak door to her room. It was not overtly feminine. White marble, dark wood, an enormous four-poster bed, and a wall of windows overlooking the private gardens. "This is yours," I said, walking to the connecting door, a solid, unmarked thing that blended seamlessly with the wall. I pressed a button on the frame, and a tiny green light confirmed the lock was disabled. "If you need anything at all, you use that door, and you wake me. Understood?" Her eyes, wide and dark, traveled from the door to the bed and then back to me. The high sexual tension was an unwelcome guest in the room. We were talking security, but our bodies were talking fire. She was stunning in her anger and her fear, and the memory of her frantic energy in the car was an unwelcome distraction. "Understood," she whispered, her voice husky. "Good." I walked to the door to my own room, my hand already on the knob. "Tomorrow, we begin the training. You will meet my accountant, my chief of security, and the household manager. You will learn the layout, the schedules, and the names. You are no longer just Lia Costa. You are Mrs. Volkov. Do not disappoint me." "And what do I call you?" she asked suddenly, just as I was about to close the door. I paused, looking back at her. "My name is Cian. But when we are in public, when we are discussing us to anyone who matters, you will call me darling." She looked aghast. "Darling? That's absurd. I don't even know you." A dark smile finally touched my lips, a genuine one that felt dangerous. "Then you have 24 hours to start getting to know me, darling. I stepped into my room and closed the door, cutting off her reaction. I leaned against the wood, listening to the absolute silence of my room, broken only by my own ragged exhale. Darling. It was a mockery of a term of endearment, a deliberate piece of ammunition. But the way it sounded in my head, aimed at her, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I walked to my dresser, pulled out a clean shirt, and stopped. My hands were shaking, not from fear or fatigue, but from a sudden, potent, and utterly unacceptable surge of uncontrolled arousal. It was the proximity, the new rules, the necessity of performance. It was a chemical reaction to the knowledge that the daughter of my enemy, the girl I had exiled and ignored, was now 10 feet away, separated by a single unlocked door. This arrangement is strictly tactical, I reminded myself, pulling the shirt over my head. She is a weapon against Salvatore, nothing more. But deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew the game had changed. The rules were broken, and that simple, innocent-looking waitress with the sharp tongue and the terrified eyes was about to become the most dangerous thing in my life. I had brought her into my house to secure my empire. Now, I felt like she might be the one to burn it down. The next chapter will return to Lia's POV in Chapter 3, The Gilded Cage, focusing on the oppressive luxury, the initial arguments and banter over their forced proximity, and her feeling of losing her independence.
Chapter 3. Lia. The silence of the North Wing was a heavy, expensive thing. It didn't just absorb sound, it swallowed life. In my tiny apartment above the Velvet Spoon, I could hear the distant roar of the city, the shouts of late-night drinkers, and the rumble of the subway, all the discordant, beautiful music of freedom. Here, in the master suite of the Volkov estate, there was nothing but the soft hiss of the automated climate control and the frantic, echoing pulse of my own heart. I was surrounded by wealth that felt less like luxury and more like a punishment. The room was breathtaking. High ceilings, silk-covered walls, and a view that stretched over acres of manicured, guarded grounds. It was the absolute zenith of my gilded cage. And 10 feet away, separated by a deceptively ordinary-looking oak door, was the man who held the key. The man who had commanded me to call him darling. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the entire night pacing the imported Turkish rug, listening to the phantom sounds I thought I heard from the other side of that door. Was he asleep? Was he working? Was he thinking about the proximity he had enforced? The thought of him, Cian Volkov, just a thin layer of wood away, was an electric shock that made every nerve ending hum with unwelcome awareness. I was meant to be the shy, compliant piece of paperwork that solidified a peace treaty. Now I was a pawn pushed into the center of the chessboard, forced into a starring role I never auditioned for. And I despised being pushed. I was dressed before the sun was fully up, in a simple silk robe and bare feet, and decided to confront the prison before it confronted me. I found the kitchen, a stainless steel cathedral of efficiency, staffed by 3 terrified people in blinding white uniforms. My first run-in wasn't with Cian, but with the household manager, a woman named Mrs. Petrov, whose face was as sharp and unforgiving as a newly forged blade. "Mrs. Volkov, you should have waited for the summons," Mrs. Petrov said, her Russian accent clipping the words like ice shards. "The senior eats at 8 o'clock precisely, and only in the formal dining room." "Good morning, Mrs. Petrov," I said, pulling out a chair at the immense granite island. "And please just call me Lia. Since I'll be running this household, or at least pretending to, we should drop the formality. And I prefer my coffee with a double shot of espresso and my own decisions. I'll eat here. Inform the signor that if he wants company, he'll have to come find me." The look of utter shock on her face was deeply, profoundly satisfying. The staff were used to the cold distance of the Volkov marriage. They were expecting the compliant, easily forgotten wife. They were about to get the one who had just spent 2 years scrubbing other people's martinis off a floor. I was halfway through my perfect cappuccino when the man himself appeared, descending the floating staircase that overlooked the breakfast nook. He was wearing black trousers and a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a warrior who had just paused a workout. He was devastatingly attractive in a way that felt like a threat. He didn't greet me, he didn't smile. He simply walked over, his winter storm eyes fixed on the coffee mug in my hand, his stride silent and commanding. "You are late," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "And you are early," I countered instantly. "It's 7:40. "And you're not in the formal dining room." He stopped right next to me. He was close enough that I could smell the clean soap and the trace of that expensive, dangerous cologne. The sudden, intense proximity, after 2 years of calculated distance, made my breath hitch. The high sexual tension was an audible crackle in the air, a chemical reaction that neither of us could ignore. "The formality is for effect, Lia. The schedule is for discipline. Your actions undermine my authority." He leaned one large, warm hand on the island right beside my elbow, effectively caging me. "My actions are establishing a new narrative," I retorted, meeting his gaze, refusing to lean back. "The old narrative, the invisible, disposable wife, is dead. You killed it last night when you called me your wife in public. The new narrative needs a wife who is strong, opinionated, and independent. It shows the world that Cian Volkov isn't just seeking submission. He's seeking a partner. That's power, darling." I used his detested endearment with a sweet, lethal emphasis. His jaw tightened. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued, perhaps even teased. A flicker of something hot, recognition, maybe lust, crossed his eyes before he masked it. "You learn fast," he murmured, the words low and dangerous. "A partner manages my interests. I gave Mrs. Petrov the schedule. You will adhere to it. You have a security briefing at 900, a budget meeting at 1100, and a wardrobe consultation this afternoon. You will not embarrass me with your taste for simplicity." I laughed, a short, genuine burst of amusement. "You want me to be an ornamental doll, Cian? That's not a partner. That's a prop. And if I'm a prop, I'm useless to you. The world respects the woman who argues with her king. It fears the king who allows it." I pushed my coffee mug aside. "I will manage this household, but on my terms. I won't just be a beautiful decoration. I need a purpose beyond shopping and hosting. I need a place to be." I stood up, needing to escape the magnetic pull of his presence. My eyes drifted over the enormous, soulless space of the kitchen and landed on the door leading to a rarely used storage area. "What is in there?" I asked, gesturing towards it. He followed my gaze. "An unused receiving room. Storage. Why?" "It has good light," I said, the thought suddenly forming a lifeline in my mind. "I want it. I need a studio. If I have to live in this gilded cage, I need a wall to scream on. I need to paint." His silence was profound. He looked at me. Really looked, past the fiery, defiant woman and into the quiet, desperate artist I was. "You paint?" he asked, his voice softer, the commander momentarily replaced by a man simply absorbing information. "Yes, I do. It's the only part of my life that is mine, Cian. If you take that, I will be useless. I will break, and a broken pawn is worse than a missing one." The honesty in my words was terrifying, a raw exposure of my deepest vulnerability. He considered me for a long moment, the silence stretching taut, until it was almost painful. This was a moment of true emotional depth, a necessary break from the high-stakes game. He could deny me easily, but he hesitated. He saw the need in my eyes, the plea not for freedom, but for a single, small piece of self. Fine, he conceded, the word clipped, but definitive. The room is yours. But the security briefing is non-negotiable, and the wardrobe consultant is coming. We need to project power, Lia, and power wears designer silks, not cotton aprons. I'll wear the silks, I promised, a genuine, grateful smile touching my lips, a smile that felt shockingly intimate. But I'll ruin them with charcoal dust. Fair trade, darling. I turned, leaving him standing in the breakfast nook, contemplating the messy compromise. My victory was small, but it was mine. I had a space, a place to bleed my emotions onto canvas, and the knowledge that I had just seen a momentary crack in the impenetrable armor of Cian Volkov, a crack of curiosity, of grudging respect, perhaps even of a fledgling care. I spent the rest of the morning absorbing the terrifying reality of his empire. The security briefing was comprehensive and chilling, detailing every single camera, panic room, and escape route. The budget meeting was an avalanche of numbers that made my waitress tips look like pocket change. But through it all, the one constant was the awareness of him. We sat on opposite ends of a ridiculously long table, yet I could feel the heat radiating off him, the magnetic pull that had nothing to do with fear anymore, and everything to do with the intense, simmering chemistry we were now forced to share. At one point, my hand reached instinctively for a pen to take a note, and his large, warm hand reached for the same one. Our fingers brushed. The contact was brief, less than a second, but it was electric, leaving a searing trail on my skin. I snatched my hand back as if burned, and I saw his control falter for an instant. His eyes flashed with a raw, predatory hunger before he covered it expertly. "Control yourself, Mrs. Volkov," he muttered, his voice low, only for my ears. It wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. "I am perfectly controlled, darling," I shot back, forcing a cool indifference I didn't feel. "I'm just admiring how well your tie matches the blood pressure monitor I should be wearing." He gave a harsh, short exhale that might have been a laugh. "I prefer you defiant. It makes the subsequent correction more enjoyable." And that was the game. He pushed. I pushed back. And with every boundary tested, the air between us grew thicker, warmer, and much, much more dangerous. I might be trapped in a gilded cage, but the lion had just moved into the cage next to mine, and the connecting door was unlocked.
Chapter 4. Cian. The afternoon light filtered through the tinted windows of my private study, turning the dust motes dancing in the air into glittering, irrelevant threats. I didn't work from home often, but today was a necessity. I needed to gauge the effectiveness of my new strategic asset, Lia, and simultaneously deal with the collateral damage of moving her from her self-imposed exile into my immediate orbit. The collateral damage arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, impeccably dressed and smelling of a perfume that screamed Italian arrogance and old, shared history. "Cian caro," Viviana Moretti purred, gliding into the room with the practiced ease of a woman who felt ownership over the space. Viviana was a necessary evil, brilliant, ruthless, and the heiress to the Moretti banking syndicate, which was crucial to my legitimate businesses. She was also a former lover, a fact she liked to remind me of with every lingering touch and suggestive comment. I didn't rise. "Viviana, you're late." "Only fashionably. I heard the gossip. The whispers are that the Volkov family has finally put its investment on display." She sat on the edge of the leather sofa, crossing her exquisite legs. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were assessing me for any signs of weakness. "Tell me this little thing, your wife. Is she truly the waitress they say she is?" My jaw tightened. "She is Mrs. Volkov." She is secured and fully integrated into my life. Do not test me on this, Viviana. Oh, I wouldn't dream of testing you. She laughed, a brittle, cynical sound. But a man of your stature must admit that a shy, suddenly domesticated creature pulled from behind a bar is hardly a suitable queen. She needs training. She needs steel. She has enough steel, I murmured, recalling the defiant fire in her eyes this morning when she demanded the unused receiving room for a studio. It was a foolish request. Art was a distraction, but the sheer force of her demand had been startling. She will break, and a broken pawn is worse than a missing one. Her words echoed in my mind. For the first time, I had seen her vulnerability and recognized it as a potential weakness in my strategy, not a weakness in her character. Before I could change the subject, the study door opened. Lia. She was dressed in a simple, dark green designer dress, a victory of the morning's wardrobe consultant, but she hadn't worn the jewelry Cian's assistant had laid out. Her hair was pulled back simply. She still looked fragile, but tonight there was a quiet, resolute carriage to her body, a determination that defied the silk she wore. She stopped just inside the room, her eyes going immediately to Viviana, who was now smiling a practiced, superior smile. "Ah, the blushing bride," Viviana announced, rising gracefully. "Viviana Moretti, dear. I handle many of Cian's interests." She extended a hand, palm down, the gesture dripping with condescension. I watched Lia. This was the first real test of her new role. A subtle failure here, a stammer, a flinch, a look of subservience, and Viviana would use it as ammunition against me for weeks. Lia knew none of the rules of this savage society. Lia approached, her steps even. She didn't flinch. Instead of taking Viviana's hand for the expected limp handshake, she simply nodded once, a quick, dismissive gesture. "I know who you are, Ms. Moretti," Lia said, her voice clear, devoid of shyness. "And I know what you handle. I trust Cian has made it clear that I am now his primary interest." Viviana's smile froze. She was used to women cowering, not women cutting. How quaint. Still using those silly little terms of endearment, I see. I suppose you need them to remind yourself that you are more than just a passing novelty. The insult was sharp, aimed straight at the insecurity of her history. I felt a surge of cold fury, ready to step in and shut Viviana down. Do not engage, Lia. Do not give her the satisfaction. But Lia didn't look at me for rescue. She stood her ground, her small hands clasped calmly in front of her. "My marriage is not a novelty, Ms. Moretti. It is a treaty, and treaties are built on mutual respect and security. I don't need pet names to know where I stand," Lia replied, her tone conversational, yet utterly devastating. She paused, then tilted her head slightly, a small, knowing smirk gracing her lips. "I believe you, however, need to remind yourself of where you stand. You are a business partner. I am a wife. I'm sorry if that distinction muddies the waters for you. Perhaps you should stick to banking." The air cracked. Viviana was speechless, her sophisticated mask finally shattered, revealing pure, venomous rage. I could practically feel the hot blood rush to her face. She was not used to being dismissed, especially not by a woman she considered trash. I felt an unexpected, dangerous surge of pride. Lia hadn't attacked Viviana's character. She had attacked her relevance. She had protected my image by not lowering herself to a catfight and simultaneously established her own importance in the hierarchy. It was a magnificent, ruthless move. You have a surprising sharp edge, little waitress, Viviana finally spat out, her voice barely controlled. I learned to be fast on my feet working around people who spilled their drinks, Lia replied coolly. I learned to be even faster around people who spill secrets. I rose from my chair, effectively ending the confrontation before it could escalate into actual bloodshed. Viviana, the transfer documents are on the desk. Lia, you have 15 minutes to change before the security review of your new studio. Viviana glared at Lia one last time, an unspoken promise of future revenge hanging in the air, then turned and stalked to the desk. Lia, still composed, gave me a brief, non-committal nod and left the room. I waited until the door closed behind her before turning to Viviana. You will not address my wife like that again. Ever. My voice was a low threat, not a warning. Viviana scoffed, signing the documents with an angry flourish. You're defending her? Cian, she's a viper. You married a viper. She has Salvatore Costa's blood in her veins. And she is wearing my name, I countered, my eyes cold. She defended my position and secured my authority in front of you and the staff. You made her look stronger, Viviana. That was a serious tactical mistake. She left shortly after, defeated and deeply offended. I stood there for a long moment, the silence amplifying the internal chaos I was feeling. Intrigue was an inadequate word for the sudden fascination she held for me. I had assumed she was a passive player, easy to isolate and control. I was wrong. She was intelligent, quick-witted, and carried herself with an inner conviction I hadn't expected. The way she had used that simple word, partner, to dismantle Viviana was masterful. I walked to the window, watching the sunset bleed across the guarded grounds. My marriage was a cold, calculated transaction. My attraction to her was supposed to be non-existent. Yet when she'd stood her ground, facing down Viviana's cruelty with that quiet dignity and that unexpected steel spine, I had felt an undeniable, intense surge of sizzling hot chemistry that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with pure, masculine desire. She hadn't asked for my protection. She'd commanded her own space. That independence was fiercely, lethally attractive. I remembered the brief brush of our hands this morning over the pen. I remembered the heat, the electric jolt. I had called her defiant. She was more than defiant. She was a genuine adversary, and one who was far too close. I needed to maintain control. I needed to remind her, and myself, that she was a piece on the board, not the prize. I found her half an hour later in the unused receiving room, now designated as her studio. She had already pulled the drapes back to let in the last of the light, cleared a space, and was sketching furiously in a pad she must have smuggled from her apartment. The security team finished their sweep, I announced, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't look up, her charcoal scratching against the heavy paper. Fine. Put in a deadbolt. I don't want the staff disturbing me. It has the most sophisticated retinal scanners in the city. You don't need a deadbolt, Lia. I need the illusion of privacy, she retorted, finally lifting her head. Her eyes were intense, focused. The emotional depth was visible in her gaze, in the energy she channeled into the drawing. I walked closer, drawn against my better judgment. I glanced at the sketchbook. It wasn't the light, airy watercolor I might have expected from the shy waitress. It was dark, powerful, and deeply emotional. A sprawling ink drawing of a beautiful, ornate birdcage, empty, but with a massive, looming shadow cast over it. It was a raw illustration of her entrapment. It was a mirror to her soul. This is good, I said, the unexpected compliment escaping before I could stop it. Thank you. She didn't look overly pleased. She looked exhausted. It's the only way I can scream without anyone hearing. I realized then, with a profound, almost devastating clarity, that my asset wasn't just defiant. She was profoundly lonely. The woman who had just stared down Viviana and won was hiding a fragile core that was drowning in the cold reality of our marriage. The thought was a complication I didn't want, a vulnerability I couldn't afford. About Viviana, I began. You handled yourself well. You are stronger than I gave you credit for. She shrugged, putting the charcoal down. I just told the truth. I am your wife. She is not. I defended my position. I don't need your thanks, Cian. I know, I said, walking closer still, until I was right next to the easel. The air was charged again, the heavy presence of teasing and high sexual tension making every breath shallow. But you do need to understand the stakes. You made a powerful enemy today. You will be tested again, and soon. You need to be ready. I'll be ready, she promised, her voice firm. She looked up at me, her face inches from mine, and the proximity was an immediate, powerful physical threat. But if you're going to keep me locked up in here, maybe you should stick around and teach me some of the rules, darling. After all, we're supposed to be playing the happy couple. It was a challenge, a dare, and a stunning invitation, all wrapped in that detested endearment. Her breath smelled faintly of the strong coffee she'd had earlier, and the sight of her lips, slightly parted, was nearly my undoing. I knew she was playing the game, using the tension between us as a weapon, and I, the man of absolute control, was utterly susceptible to the lure. I reached out, my fingers just brushing the delicate curve of her jawline. Be careful what you ask for, Lia. My lessons are not gentle.
Chapter 5. Lia. The studio was no longer an unused receiving room. It was my sanctuary, a small, defiant outpost of chaos in Cian's perfectly ordered fortress. The light was excellent, flooding the space in the afternoon. But the real power of the room lay in its silence. Here, behind the sophisticated retinal scanner Cian had installed, a maddening irony. I could finally drop the armor of Mrs. Volkov. I was draped in an old, paint-stained tunic. The expensive silk dress Cian's consultant had forced upon me tossed onto a chair like a dead skin. My hair was tied up messily, and my hands were thick with charcoal dust. I wasn't painting the manor's sprawling gardens or the polished elegance of my new cage. I was drawing the door, the connecting door to Cian's room. It was an obsessive study. The cold, unyielding wood, the invisible seam where it met the wall, and the faint, almost imperceptible green glow of the security light. I drew it again and again, each time making the door larger, more oppressive, until it filled the entire page, becoming a solid, suffocating wall between me and my last thread of sanity. The encounter with Viviana had left me surprisingly drained, not because I had won, but because I had been forced to expend the energy of survival. I had played the role of the fierce queen, and Cian had been thoroughly intrigued. Now, I needed to re-establish the distance. His sudden, intense curiosity, that flicker of respect, was far more dangerous than his original indifference. Indifference left me alone. Curiosity brought him closer. And proximity, as I had discovered this morning over a shared pen, was lethal. I was focused on cross-hatching the oppressive shadow of the door when I heard the sound I dreaded. The quiet, authoritative click of the retinal scanner. I had been foolish enough to grant the staff access for cleaning, which meant Cian had access too. Lia! His voice, low and resonant, cut through the quiet. I didn't immediately turn. I'm working, Cian. My studio hours are private, even for the boss. Your door was unlocked, he stated, walking closer. His black suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, a stark contrast to my dusty refuge. I wanted to ensure the security adjustments were satisfactory. They're satisfactory. Now leave. He ignored the dismissal, walking past the easel to the massive work table where my sketchbooks were laid open. This was exactly what I had feared. The exposure. The peeling back of the layers I guarded so viciously. He stopped at the book I'd been working on last night, the one depicting the empty, shadowed cage. He picked up the heavy volume, his large, imposing hands dwarfing the paper. I told you this was good, he murmured, flipping the pages slowly. He wasn't rushing. He was inspecting. The heat rushed to my cheeks. He was viewing the most naked, vulnerable part of my soul, my emotional depth rendered in charcoal and ink. There were drawings of my cold, detached childhood. Quick, angry sketches of my father, Salvatore, a man with a smile that never reached his eyes. And then, after the wedding, drawings of silent, lonely streets, of bars, of a small, frightened girl shrinking in the corner of a grand room. He paused on a specific page, a detailed, stark portrait of him. I had drawn Cian months ago, sitting alone in a car waiting for me outside my old apartment, looking utterly exhausted, the shadows under his eyes profound, the coldness of his mask stripped away by fatigue. I had caught a moment of unexpected, profound loneliness in him, a shared quality I hadn't realized until now. "Why did you draw this?" he asked, his voice low, almost stunned. I finally turned, wiping my dusty hands on my tunic. It was a study in light and shadow. You were standing still. You are an excellent model. Don't lie, Lia, he ordered, without any anger. The lack of command in his tone was more unnerving than a shout. You captured something that no one sees. Not Viviana, not my capos, not even me sometimes. I walked to the table and gently took the sketchbook from his hands, closing it with a definitive thud. It's a drawing of a man trapped by his own power. It's not unique. We are all trapped, Cian. He took a step closer, reducing the space between us to an intolerable gap. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, searched mine with an unnerving, almost painful intensity. Are you trapped by me? The question was honest, brutal, and demanded a truth I hadn't prepared to give. If I said yes, I sounded weak. If I said no, I sounded like a liar. I'm trapped by the arrangement, I clarified, maintaining my composure. I was forced into this marriage. I was banished to a tiny apartment to live an anonymous life. Now I am forced into a gilded cage to live a public one. Yes, Cian, I am trapped, and you know what the loneliness of the cage does to a person. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached out. And this time, there was no accidental brush of the hands. His large, warm fingers gently brushed the charcoal dust from my cheekbone, leaving a clean streak on my skin. The intimate touch was a jolt of pure, sizzling hot chemistry, undeniable and unwanted. I see the art, Lia. I see the darkness, the loneliness you felt in that apartment. I assumed you preferred it that way. You never complained? I'm not a complainer. I'm an artist. I process things, I whispered, fighting the sudden urge to lean into the warmth of his touch. And yes, for 2 years I was profoundly, devastatingly lonely. My father sold me, and my husband ignored me. It was isolating. The admission of my loneliness hung between us, the sound of a small, fragile truth shattering the walls we had built. It wasn't banter, it wasn't a tease, and it certainly wasn't a power play. It was a genuine moment of emotional depth. His thumb began to stroke my cheekbone, a slow, deliberate movement that was utterly distracting. I don't ignore you now. I look at you, Lia, and I see more than just Salvatore's daughter. I see the woman who stared down Viviana. I see the artist who draws my exhaustion. And what do you want to see? I asked, forcing myself to look him in the eye. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to my lips. His breath was warm on my skin, his scent a dizzying mix of power and expensive soap. I want to see the woman who belongs here. The one who will stand beside me. The one who will call me darling and mean it. The high sexual tension in the room was now unbearable, a palpable heat that felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. This wasn't the distant commander. This was a man, raw and searching, trying to decipher the puzzle I presented. And what about the man who won't even admit he needs anyone by his side? I challenged, my voice barely a whisper. The man who still keeps a part of himself locked down tighter than the safe in his study? A dark, dangerous smile touched his lips. You draw well, Lia. Perhaps you can draw the blueprints to that safe, too. But until then... He closed the remaining gap. His lips were firm, possessive, and utterly intoxicating as they claimed mine. It wasn't the public, staged kiss from a forced gala. This was a direct, raw assertion of the sizzling hot chemistry that had been simmering beneath the surface since I dropped that tray. It was a kiss that acknowledged the tension, the loneliness, the defiance, and the deep, unwanted attraction. I gasped, momentarily lost to the sheer force of his mouth, the soft yet undeniable pressure. He tasted like cold control and hot hunger, and I felt my knees buckle. He pulled back just slightly, resting his forehead against mine, his breath ragged. That is what I want to see, Lia. And that is what you will learn to give me. He was gone before I could formulate a single thought, leaving me standing alone, my heart hammering against my ribs, the taste of him lingering, the charcoal dust forgotten. He had kissed me in my sanctuary, a brilliant, brutal move. He hadn't just secured an asset. He had staked a claim. Chapter 7. Lia. The ride home from the Russo Gala was silent, but it was a silence thick with the raw, chaotic energy of the kiss. My lips still throbbed, a vivid reminder of Cian's calculated yet utterly devastating possessiveness. He hadn't looked at me once since we left the ballroom, his gaze fixed on the passing night, his jaw locked. He was pretending it was only a tactical move. I was pretending I hadn't crumbled under the weight of the sizzling hot chemistry that kiss unleashed. We were both magnificent liars. I felt feverish, exhausted, and terrifyingly awake. The kiss had stripped away the last pretense of our cold arrangement. We were combustible. The next morning, I retreated to my studio, trying to channel the tempest of emotions onto the canvas. But the image that kept forming was not an empty cage. It was Cian's face, etched with cold, fierce possession, framed by the dark, hostile eyes of the mob bosses at the gala. I couldn't escape the feeling that the marriage had stopped being a piece of paper and started being a battleground, and I was caught in the crossfire. My fear sharpened when late that afternoon, Mrs. Petrov informed me that my father, Salvatore Costa, was waiting for me in the small, sunlit library. Cian was, conveniently, unavailable, according to his head of security. The library was warm, lined with leather-bound classics that Cian, I suspected, had never read. Salvatore stood by the globe, spinning it slowly, his posture one of relaxed, paternal affection. A guise that never failed to curdle my stomach. "Lia, bambina," he greeted me, his voice smooth and oily. He held out his arms. I didn't move, keeping the desk between us. "Father. I assume this isn't a social call. You haven't visited me in 2 years?" He sighed, dropping his arms, the mask of disappointment settling perfectly. "Cian is too controlling. He keeps you locked away." "I worry about you, daughter. I worry about what he is doing to you, making you play the brazen queen." You are delicate." "I'm fine," I stated, keeping my voice cool. "And I'm not delicate. I'm Mrs. Volkov. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what is required of me." He walked slowly toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. Required by whom? By Cian? He uses people, Lia. He discards them when they are no longer useful. He has already broken the original contract we had, to keep you safe and separate. Now he parades you, exposes you to his rivals. "I'm his wife," I insisted, fighting the instinct to flinch under his gaze. "Yes, and a wife is a pawn in this world, Bambina. You should know that better than anyone." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "The balance of power is shifting, Lia. Things are about to change, drastically, and when the smoke clears, the weak pieces are swept from the board." He didn't need to finish the thought. It was a veiled, terrifying threat. The treaty is failing, Cian will fall, and you will be collateral damage. "Cian is not weak," I shot back, the defense immediate and sincere, surprising even myself. Salvatore smiled, a wide, knowing, serpentine twist of his lips. "We shall see. There is a final peace meeting scheduled soon, a negotiation of terms. Things will be resolved." He patted my cheek, a gesture that felt like a brand, then turned to leave. "Be a good girl, Lia. Stay out of the way. When the time comes, I'll take care of you." I stood rigid until the library door closed behind him. His words were a viper's whisper, infecting the quiet with venom. He's planning something. He's planning to betray Cian. The sudden, cold dread that filled me was not just fear for my safety, but a gut-deep fear for the man who had kissed me like a lifeline. That evening, unable to focus, unable to paint, I decided to do what my father had accused me of, being a good girl and staying out of the way. I went looking for a book, a pointless, desperate attempt at normalcy. The only place in this enormous house that housed a significant collection of books was the small, rarely used annex off Cian's private study, a place he hadn't thought to lock down with a retinal scanner. The study was dark, illuminated only by the rain-slicked city lights filtering through the tall windows. I crept in silently, pulling the heavy door almost shut behind me. I walked straight to the leather shelves lining the annex wall, pulling out a heavy, dusty volume of classical poetry. That's when I heard it. Voices, low, rough and unmistakable, coming from the main part of the study. Cian's voice. He hadn't left. He was meeting with his two most trusted capos, Dante and Marco, not the Ricci brother, a different one. I froze, heart pounding against my ribs, instantly realizing I was a hidden ear to a conversation that could cost me my life if I was discovered. I pressed myself into the shadows behind a large, forgotten globe. "Salvatore is too confident," Cian was saying, his voice a low, hard rasp. "He is planning a move. He is pushing the date of the negotiation forward. It's a trap, Dante. But what kind?" "The meeting is in 3 days, Cian," Dante replied, his voice heavy with warning. "It's at the old warehouse near the docks. Neutral ground. That smells like an ambush. If he is going to make his move, it will be there." "He is short on men and funds," Marco reasoned. "He can't risk an all-out war. It has to be quick. Surgical." Then, Salvatore's name was mentioned in connection to me. I strained to listen, every nerve ending screaming. "He is leveraging his daughter, Cian," Dante stated flatly. "The public show at the Russo Gala, it made her a visible asset, but also a visible target. If Salvatore can use her as a diversion, or a hostage, even for 5 minutes, it buys him the time he needs." Cian's voice was lethal, cold, and utterly terrifying. "He married her to me for peace. He won't use her. That's a violation of the treaty. He will violate it if it gets him your head, Marco said. The intelligence suggests he plans to spring the trap the moment negotiations begin. While you are seated, he needs something to draw the eye, something to create chaos. Chaos, Cian repeated, the word sounding like a death knell. Lia told me he just left. He played the worried father. He told her the balance of power was shifting. I pressed my hands over my mouth to stifle a gasp. He's telling her I'll take care of her. He's planning to use me as the distraction. He wants Cian to worry about the delicate flower while his true strike team moves into position. The assassination attempt was timed to my vulnerability. I had always known I was a pawn in this arrangement, but I never realized I was the bait. A cold, resolute calm settled over me, pushing out the panic. I walked through the events, the forced marriage, the 2 years of isolation, the insult at the restaurant, the sudden move to the mansion, the enforced proximity, the kiss. Cian had violated the treaty to protect his image and secure his asset. My father was now violating the treaty to assassinate the asset's owner. I had a choice. My blood family, the man who sold me, planned to murder the man who, despite his coldness and terrifying power, had just started to look at me, truly see the person behind the disguise. The man who had given me back my art studio. The man whose kiss was still branded on my soul. I chose Cian. The fake marriage was over. My loyalty was clear. I waited until the conversation in the study moved on to logistical details about shipments and docks. Then silently I slipped out of the library annex, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I had to warn him, not as Lia Costa, Salvatore's daughter, but as Mrs. Volkov, the woman who had just realized she was standing by her husband's side on a precipice. I raced to the north wing, my bare feet silent on the cold marble floor, and used the code I now knew by heart to enter his private chamber. He was sitting at his desk, surrounded by maps and documents, a glass of amber liquid next to his elbow. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp with annoyance at the intrusion. I slammed the heavy door shut, locking it with shaking hands, and stood there, breathless, terrified, and utterly resolute. "It's a trap, Cian. The meeting in 3 days. The docks. It's an ambush, and my father is going to use me as the diversion. He just told me he'd take care of me. He thinks I'm going to run, or scream, or panic, anything to distract your security team for 5 minutes. You need to call it off, or you need a complete impenetrable counter-trap." I walked toward him, placing my hands flat on the desk, meeting his gaze with a fierce, unwavering determination. My eyes were burning with conviction. "You asked if you could trust me. You asked me to be your partner. Now you know, I choose you." The look on his face was one of absolute, stunned stillness, a rare and terrifying sight. The commander, the king, was seeing his entire world tilt on its axis, tipped over by a terrified woman in a paint-stained tunic.
Chapter 8. Cian. The blood ran cold in my veins, not from fear, but from the shock of the unexpected. The security of my private chamber, the one place I allowed my guard to truly drop, had been breached. Not by a hitman, but by my wife, standing before me in a paint-stained tunic, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a conviction that was either undeniable truth or masterful deception. "It's a trap, Cian. The meeting in 3 days. The docks. My father is going to use me as the diversion." The words hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back in my leather chair, forcing my expression into a mask of pure, glacial calm. My mind was already racing, analyzing the threat, but more importantly, analyzing her. I am a mob boss. I trust no one. Lia Costa was a time bomb with Salvatore's blood in her veins. For 2 years, she had been a non-factor, a piece of paper. Now she was an emotional complication. The forced intimacy, the kiss, the shared glances, the reluctant respect I developed for her steel spine. made her the perfect tool for a betrayal. Salvatore knew I was watching her. He knew I was intrigued. What better way to ensure my death than to make me doubt my own instincts, by having the warning delivered by the only person I was actively trying not to hate? "You overheard something," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Where were you?" "The annex off your study." I went to get a book. I heard Dante and Marco confirming the obvious. "It's an ambush at the dockyard, but you missed the final piece of the puzzle. I am the chaos." Salvatore played the worried father, telling me to stay safe. He's counting on me panicking. She had the details right. Dante and Marco had met with me earlier. The timing of her father's visit was confirmed. Everything aligned. Too perfectly. I stood slowly, deliberately, rising to my full height. The desk was my fortress, but I needed to close the distance. I rounded the mahogany, stopping inches from her, forcing her to look up into my eyes. The proximity was a weapon. "You choose me?" I repeated her words, the skepticism heavy. "You choose the man who banished you to a slum for 2 years, over your own blood. Why, Lia? Why the sudden loyalty? Is this a part of Salvatore's plan? To make me think I'm safe, so I send my own men to the trap?" Her face crumpled momentarily, a flash of genuine hurt that I immediately catalogued as another potential play. "Don't you dare. He sold me. He traded me like property. You may be cold, but you are not a liar." "He is. I heard the details, Cian. He's going to use the general chaos to ensure you are the first one taken down. I may hate this cage, but I will not be the reason the lion is killed." Her passion was intense, but I couldn't afford to be swayed by raw emotional depth. My life and the stability of my entire organization rested on this decision. Trusting her meant death. Distrusting her meant potentially missing a crucial truth. "Prove it," I ordered, the word a hard, unyielding command. "How?" she challenged, her chin raised, eyes blazing. "I'm trapped here. I'm giving you everything I have. You are giving me circumstantial information I already suspected. If Salvatore planned this, he would have prepared for the chance that someone, a maid, a capo, would warn me. He would have an elaborate failsafe, something that only he would trust his daughter to know." I walked to the secure window, my back to her. I need a definitive piece of information, something small, something he only recently shared, that confirms the structural weakness of his operation. If I go to that dockyard, I need to know where his snipers are stationed, where his perimeter breach will occur. She was silent for a terrifyingly long moment. I could hear her ragged breathing. The air was thick with the high stakes of the moment. "He sent a car for me last week," she finally said, her voice strained. "A driver named Massimo. Salvatore's usual chauffeurs are all older men. Massimo is new, young, and extremely quiet. He drove me to a small meeting with Salvatore at a dilapidated church in the North End. They were finalizing details." I nodded slowly. Massimo was new, a fresh face, untraceable by my established security networks. "Good. And what else?" I pressed. "Something about the dockyard itself." "I don't know," she cried, the tears finally welling in her eyes, blurring the defiance. "I wasn't there. He told me nothing." I spun around, closing the distance again. "Then I will give you a chance to acquire it. And this is the true cost of your loyalty, Lia. This is the test." I pulled a small, silver-plated smartphone from my jacket pocket, a burner phone I used for high-risk communication. I placed it in her trembling hand. Massimo is your father's man. He will be on Salvatore's security detail for the next 48 hours. I need you to use that connection. I need you to call Massimo, using the emotional currency of being Salvatore's daughter. You will tell him that you are terrified for your father, that you are worried about the neutral ground of the meeting. You will ask him about the church. Where exactly was that meeting? What did he see there? Use your fear to get him to talk. My demand was a vicious twist of the knife. I was asking her to actively engage with her father's operation, to place herself directly in the path of the assassin, and to use her genuine terror as bait. "Why the church?" she whispered, confusion overriding the fear. "Because Salvatore would never trust a driver with the location of an assassination attempt. But he might trust him with the location of a seemingly innocent recent meeting. If Massimo can confirm the exact location of that church, down to the street and parish name, I can run an immediate forensic satellite sweep. If there's an active communications relay, a cache of weapons, or a surveillance hub set up near that church, something related to the final plan, then I know you're telling the truth. And you have saved my life." She stared at the phone, then at me. The enormity of the risk, the possibility of being exposed as a traitor by her own father's man, was immense. If she made the call and it was a lie, Salvatore would know, and she would die. "If this is a trap, Lia," I warned, my voice flat and final, "if you are lying, I will know. And the cost will be catastrophic for everyone you've ever cared about." She looked down at the phone, and then she looked at the connecting door to my room, the unlocked door that symbolized the terrifying intimacy of our new lives. She took a deep breath, and I watched, mesmerized, as the tears dried and the fear was slowly, deliberately, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was her point of no return. "Fine," she said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "Give me the number for Massimo. But when I prove I'm not a liar, Cian, when I hand you the information that saves your life, you will no longer treat me like an asset. You will treat me like a partner." I nodded once, a terse acknowledgement of the bargain. I sent the encrypted number to the burner, watched her lock herself in the studio, and then, finally, allowed myself to breathe. I stood in the silent chamber, alone, staring at the locked door of her studio. I had just risked my entire future on a woman I barely knew, whose blood dictated hatred and whose passion dictated an undeniable, terrifying desire. I had tested her loyalty with a potential death sentence, and now the true waiting began.
Chapter 9. Lia. The silver burner phone felt like a piece of frozen lead in my palm. It wasn't the weight of the phone, it was the weight of the choice. I was about to call a man named Massimo, a stranger who, by my father's mandate, might hold the key to an assassination plot and use my genuine, unadulterated fear as bait. If I succeeded, I saved Cian's life and cemented my place at his side. If I failed, Massimo would report my call, and the consequences, as Cian had promised, would be catastrophic. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my studio, staring at the connecting door. Cian was 10 feet away, waiting. The cold, analytical command he had given me had shocked me, but beneath the terror, a strange spark of pride ignited. He wasn't asking me to be meek. He was asking me to be ruthless. He was treating me for the first time not as a decorative asset, but as a crucial, intelligent part of his defense. I took 3 deep, ragged breaths, trying to find the emotional core I needed. It wasn't hard. I simply focused on the memory of my father's cold, patronizing smile and the word, pawn. I punched the number for Massimo. It rang twice, an eternity, before a quiet, professional voice answered. Yes? Massimo? This is Lia. Lia Costa, Salvatore's daughter. My voice trembled exactly as I intended. I sounded small, panicked, and utterly vulnerable. Signora Costa? I mean, Mrs. Volkov. Is everything all right? Is your father with you? Massimo's voice was cautious, instantly on guard. No, he's not. That's why I'm calling. Massimo, I'm terrified. I saw him this afternoon. He was talking about the negotiations, the meeting in 3 days, and he told me that things were going to change drastically. He told me to stay out of the way, that he would take care of me. I let my voice crack on the last words, injecting the raw, desperate fear I truly felt. I don't know anything about that, Signora, he said quickly, too quickly. I just drive, I don't listen. Please, Massimo, don't lie. You were there when he talked about the plan. You were at the church with him last week. Where was that, Massimo? Please, I just need to know where it was. If I know where he's conducting his business, I can monitor it from here. I need to know he's safe. My life depends on his safety. I knew the lie, my life depends on his safety, was the perfect manipulation. It played on the old code. Her safety is tied to Salvatore's protection. There was a long pause, filled with the static of his hesitation. He was weighing my panic against his loyalty to Salvatore. My panic, I hoped, sounded more real. It was just a quick stop, Mrs. Volkov, he conceded, lowering his voice. He met a local priest. It was near the docks, yes. St. Jude's Parish, off the Warehouse Row. He said he needed to bless the land before the meeting. St. Jude's Parish. A local, legitimate meeting place, but close enough to the trap to be crucial. Thank you, Massimo. Please don't tell him I called. I needed to know where he was going. Thank you. I hung up the phone, my hand slick with cold sweat. I had the name. It was small, circumstantial, and exactly what Cian needed. I unlocked the studio door and walked into his chamber. He was still standing where I had left him, his expression an impenetrable mask of expectation. St. Jude's Parish, I said, walking to his desk. It's a small Catholic church off the main Warehouse Row near the docks. Massimo said my father met a priest there recently to bless the land. Massimo is now terrified. He knows he shouldn't have told me. I placed the silver phone on the desk. A church near the site of an assassination attempt. It's either a brilliant irony or the perfect place to hide communications equipment, a sniper's nest or a final planning session. That is the leverage you asked for, Cian. That is the proof of my loyalty. He didn't move for another minute, his eyes drilling into mine with an intensity that seemed to peel back my skin. I held his gaze, refusing to look away, demanding his acknowledgement. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and utterly devoid of its usual cold detachment. You've risked your life for me, Lia. I risked my life for the truth, and for the bargain we made, I countered, the fire in me refusing to dim. He reached for the phone, then stopped, his large hand pausing inches from the device. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he reached out and gently cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone exactly where he'd wiped the charcoal dust days before. The test is over, Lia, he murmured, his thumb catching a lingering tear I hadn't even realized was there. You pass. You are my partner. The relief that flooded me was so vast, so powerful it made my body tremble violently. The high stakes, the constant fear, the coldness of the marriage. It all broke in that moment. I hadn't saved a mob boss. I had saved my husband. I didn't try to speak. I simply leaned into his touch, wrapping my arms around his neck and collapsing against him, burying my face in the crisp, clean scent of his shirt. He held me, not with the distant respect he showed his capos, but with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. His arms wrapped around my waist, lifting me, pulling me impossibly close. The sheer emotional depth of the relief transformed instantly into raw, unbridled desire. The tension we had built for weeks, the slow dances, the verbal sparring, the devastating kiss, exploded. He moved us, not with a gentle grace, but with a desperate, animal urgency, walking backward until his legs hit the heavy leather desk chair. He settled me into his lap, never breaking the embrace, his mouth finding mine with a hungry ferocity that matched the need surging through my veins. This wasn't a performance. This was the final, devastating collapse of the wall between us. His hands were in my hair, pulling the pins loose, scattering them across the study floor. His kiss was brutal, possessive, and yet held a desperate tenderness that spoke volumes. He was staking a final, irrefutable claim, not on his asset, but on his wife. "You're mine," he growled against my lips, the words a raw confession. "You chose me. You belong to me." "Yes," I gasped, tangling my hands in the thick silk of his dark hair, pulling him closer, demanding more. "I choose you, Cian. I am yours." He lifted me from his lap and set me on my feet beside the desk. I watched his eyes, usually storm-cold, now molten with desire. He was removing his jacket, tossing it carelessly to the floor, his entire focus solely on me. He was no longer the king. He was a man consumed by the discovery of his own heart. He took a step towards me, his hands reaching for the front of my tunic, his eyes locked on mine. "This is not the arrangement," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "The arrangement is dead," I whispered back, my voice thick with the sizzling hot chemistry that had finally caught fire. "I need you to know the cost of the choice you just made," he said, pulling me against the hard, solid expanse of his chest. "I know the cost, darling." I breathed, rising on my toes to brush my mouth against his jaw. "It's everything." The darkness of the study, the looming presence of the documents detailing the ambush, the cold threat of Salvatore, it all faded into background noise. This was the true sealing of the treaty. The violent, intimate consummation of a marriage born in cold politics and forged in the desperate heat of shared danger. The first night of our real marriage had begun.
Chapter 10. Cian. The dawn light cutting through the blinds of the master chamber felt too bright, too clinical, for the earth-shattering reality it revealed. I was awake before the sun, as always, but for the first time in my adult life I wasn't alone. Lia was sprawled across my chest, her breathing deep and even, one hand resting possessively over the scar near my heart, a remnant of a past conflict. Her dark hair was a beautiful, chaotic mess against my white pillowcase. I lay still, a monarch disarmed in his own fortress. The memory of the night, the desperate, unbridled intensity of our coupling, was an indelible brand on my skin and my soul. It wasn't the transaction I'd always viewed marriage as. It was a reckoning. I, Cian Volkov, a man who built his empire on control and calculated distance, had spent the night consumed by the woman I was supposed to keep at arm's length. The sizzling hot chemistry that had defined our tension had detonated, leaving a profound, terrifying vulnerability in its wake. I gently shifted her weight, easing myself from the bed. I needed to move. I needed to work. I needed to return to the cold reality of my command before the raw heat of the previous night completely melted my resolve. But as I stood, naked and exposed in the chill morning air, I realized the core truth. The marriage was no longer fake. She hadn't just saved my life with her warning. She had irrevocably changed it with her choice. When she slammed that door and said, "I choose you," she became more than an asset. She became my partner. The first order of business was confirming her information. I moved to the study, my movements silent and precise, retrieving the silver burner phone. I sent the coordinates for St. Jude's Parish to my chief of intelligence, demanding an immediate, discreet satellite and forensic sweep for any recent disturbances, communication devices, or caches. The report came back within the hour, while Lia was still sleeping. Confirmed. A micro-antenna relay was installed in the church bell tower within the last 48 hours. Too high-powered for a standard parish broadcast. It is a high-grade military frequency repeater. Lia was telling the truth. My father-in-law, Salvatore, was not just planning an ambush. He had set up a command center adjacent to the trap, intending to remotely manage the kill shot. If I had gone to that meeting without Lia's information, the likelihood of survival would have been less than 10%. I sat back in my chair, the relief heavy and staggering. She had delivered. She had risked her life, used her fear, and won her bargain. If I hand you the information that saves your life, you will no longer treat me like an asset. You will treat me like a partner. I didn't just feel gratitude. I felt a violent surge of love, a realization that crashed over me, utterly unbidden and completely inconvenient. I had fallen for my wife. The cold, shy waitress I'd exiled had grown into a fierce, intelligent queen who valued integrity over blood. The hours leading up to the peace meeting with Salvatore were the most focused and ruthless of my career. The plan was no longer to avoid the trap. The plan was to turn the trap back on the hunter. I assembled my most trusted capos, Dante, Marco, and my intelligence chief, in the formal conference room, a place Lia had rightly mocked for its cold formality. The meeting at the dockyard proceeds as planned, I stated, standing at the head of the immense mahogany table. But we are not going for negotiation. We are going for reckoning. I laid out the details, starting with the intel that had saved our lives. Salvatore's ambush is timed to a distraction. The perceived threat to his daughter, Mrs. Volkov, my wife. His plan relies on my security detail focusing on her when the real attack comes from the roof of the adjacent factory. Dante leaned forward, his brow furrowed. But the source of this intelligence, it came directly from Salvatore's circle. Can we trust it, Cian? I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every man. This was the true test of my leadership, and the public declaration of Lia's new status. The intelligence is solid, I said, my voice firm, allowing no room for doubt. It was acquired at great personal risk by Mrs. Volkov herself. I paused, letting the statement land. I saw the surprise, the confusion, and the silent question. The waitress. Let me be perfectly clear, I continued, leaning over the table, my hands braced against the polished wood. Mrs. Volkov is no longer an asset. She is my partner and my primary advisor. She chose to sever all ties with her father's toxic family and warned me, saving all of our lives. Her loyalty is absolute. Any disrespect or doubt directed at her will be treated as disrespect and doubt directed at me. She is your queen, and she earned that title with her own steel. The silence was the only answer I needed. Dante nodded first, his expression shifting from doubt to profound respect. Understood, Signor. She is the boss's protection. More than that, I corrected, a genuine, powerful surge of emotion rising in my chest. She is the boss's strength. As the time for the meeting approached, I walked back to the master chamber. Lia was waiting. She was dressed in the same midnight blue gown from the gala, a deliberate choice to project continuity and confidence. She wasn't just ready. She was fiercely prepared. I walked up to her, checking the hidden earpiece and mic my security team had woven into the neckline of her dress. The intel was confirmed, I told her, my eyes dark with a mixture of thanks and concern. The church bell tower is their relay point. Your warning was precise. She nodded, her face pale but determined. And the countertrap? You're not going to call the meeting off, are you? No, I said, my hand resting gently on her shoulder, feeling the delicate bone structure beneath the silk. We are going to give Salvatore the meeting he asked for. But you and I are going to walk in there together, Lia. We will be the united front he never expected. I looked at her, truly seeing the woman who was about to walk into a kill zone at my side. She was my heart, now exposed and vulnerable. I pulled her into a tight, protective embrace. I know I told you this was a necessary performance at the gala, I whispered into her hair, a raw confession spilling out. But know this, Lia. The marriage, it became real last night. You are everything I never knew I needed. I love you. She gripped the silk of my jacket, burying her face into my chest. I know, Cian. I love you too. Now let's go end this. I pulled back, my hands framing her resolute face. There is one final move you have to make. At the meeting, when the trap is sprung, I need you to address your father publicly. You are the only one who can truly seal his fate, not with a bullet, but with a denunciation. You must sever the bond completely, in front of the entire council. Do you understand the cost of that? Her eyes, clear and fierce, met mine. I'm ready to burn the bridge, Cian. Let's go take our throne. I offered her my arm. I was no longer walking into a trap with an asset. I was walking into a war with my queen.
Chapter 11. Lia. The old dockside warehouse smelled of brine, rust, and the metallic tang of fear. It was a cavernous space, poorly lit by bare bulbs hanging from the rafters, casting long, nervous shadows over the assembled chairs. The leaders of the 5 ruling families sat like stone gargoyles around a makeshift table, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the entrance. They were here for a peace negotiation. They were about to witness a war. My hand was woven tightly into the crook of Cian's arm. The expensive silk of my midnight blue gown felt like a banner of defiance. I could feel the rhythmic, powerful pulse in Cian's wrist, a steady beat that anchored me against the storm I knew was coming. The security earpiece was almost invisible against my skin, a cold, tiny lifeline connecting me to his command center. We walked into the room in absolute silence. Every gaze snapped to us, but the most important one was Salvatore Costa's. My father sat across the table, impeccably dressed, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a patronizing pity, assuming I was a terrified accessory to Cian's inevitable downfall. We sat down. The air was charged, high stakes defined by the heavy, mutual silence. Cian did not waste a second on pleasantries. We are here to discuss the breaking of the treaty, he stated, his voice ringing with cold authority. Salvatore smiled again, smooth and oily. Yes, Cian. The treaty is broken, because it was built on a lie. You cannot trust the man you trade with. I warned my daughter this. He looked at me, his gaze lingering. I tried to protect her. That was the signal. The opening salvo. My heart hammered against my ribs, but Cian's grip on my arm tightened, a silent reassurance. Indeed, Salvatore, Cian said, leaning forward. You lied. You did not come here for peace. I came here for justice, Salvatore yelled, suddenly slamming his fist on the table. It was the diversion. This man is a tyrant. He holds my family hostage. Now! In the split second that followed, the room erupted, but not in the way Salvatore planned. Before any shot could be fired, the outside world burst in. Glass shattered on the massive warehouse windows as Cian's specialized security team, already positioned, took out the perimeter snipers. The heavy door behind Salvatore's seat was kicked in, and two of Cian's quipos, Dante and Marco, burst through, leveling their weapons at Salvatore's two personal bodyguards. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Salvatore screamed, realizing his ambush had turned into his execution. His face was a mask of shock and pure venomous fury. "What is this, Volkov? An act of war?" Cian remained seated, utterly calm, radiating lethal control. "It is an act of defense, Salvatore. You came here not to negotiate, but to assassinate. We knew." Salvatore glared around the room, desperately searching for a weakness, a window of escape. "Who told you?" "One of my men betrayed me." "Who?" This was my moment. Cian looked at me, a silent, powerful demand in his eyes. The earpiece felt suddenly heavy. I had to denounce my father, sever the blood tie completely, in front of the entire assembly. This was the true, final cost of my loyalty. I stood, rising slowly, every eye in the room, every enemy, every ally, and my defeated father, fixed on me. I was shaking, but I forced the fear deep down, channeling the sheer, visceral love and conviction I had for the man sitting beside me. "It was me, Father," I said, my voice cutting through the ringing silence. It wasn't a whisper. It was clear, strong, and utterly devastating. Salvatore's mouth dropped open. The shock was genuine, profound. "Lia? Bambina? You wouldn't." I walked around the table, stopping directly across from him. The man who had sold me, then planned to use my terror as his shield, was now at my mercy. "You forced me into this marriage to protect your interests," I accused, my voice thick with 2 years of stored resentment. "You exiled me, ignored me, and then you planned to murder my husband, using my life as a 5-minute distraction. You don't care about me. You care about power." I met his gaze, my own eyes blazing with the steel he never thought I possessed. "I am Mrs. Volkov. I swore an oath. And when I heard your plan, I gave my husband the information he needed to neutralize your entire operation. You are not my father. You are an enemy of the throne. I choose my husband. I choose my home. I choose the truth." I turned, giving the assembly my back, and walked straight to Cian. The silence that followed was absolute. Salvatore was defeated, not by a bullet, but by the betrayal of his own blood, rendered powerless by the woman he had underestimated. The leaders around the table exchanged slow, heavy glances, understanding the significance of the moment. The Volkov Empire was not just secured. It had gained a queen whose loyalty was forged in fire. Cian rose, putting his arm firmly around my waist. The conflict was over. Salvatore was escorted out, his fate sealed by my public renunciation. We left the dockyard, the scent of fear replaced by the clean night air. We didn't speak a word until we were back in the private sanctuary of the master chamber. I slumped onto the silk bedspread, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving me shaky and exhausted. Cian closed the door and locked it. Not with a security code, but with the heavy, satisfying click of a traditional deadbolt. He walked to the bed and knelt before me. He didn't speak of the war. He spoke of the marriage. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulled out a small black velvet box, and opened it. Inside lay a ring. Not the cold, enormous diamond he had given me for the arranged wedding, but a simple, stunningly beautiful platinum band encrusted with tiny, fierce-looking black diamonds. "I made an oath to you, Lia," he said, his voice husky with emotion, his storm-colored eyes melting into a dark, vulnerable warmth. "I said that if you proved your loyalty, I would stop treating you like an asset and treat you like a partner? He took my left hand, pulling off the massive, cold wedding band. He slipped the new ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. This ring is not for an arranged marriage. This is for a partnership, a throne, a life. I asked you to call me darling as a tease, a mockery. Now I ask you to call me your husband, your partner, your king, because you chose this. You chose us. He didn't need to ask. The emotional depth of the moment was overwhelming. My eyes filled with tears, not of fear or pain, but of profound, overwhelming love. I choose you, Cian, I whispered, leaning forward and cupping his face. I choose this. All of it. The darkness, the danger, and the ridiculous, terrifying love. He stood, pulling me into his arms, and this kiss was different from the public, savage claim at the gala. It was soft, lingering, and full of a deep, abiding promise. It was the kiss of a man who realized he hadn't just secured his empire. He had finally secured his heart. I love you, Mrs. Volkov, he murmured against my mouth. Thank you for saving me. You saved me too, I whispered back. You gave me back my steel. The war was over. The marriage had begun. We were a true king and queen, united, forged in fire, and ready to face the world.
Chapter 12. Cian. 5 years later. The sun poured into the studio, now expanded to encompass the entire west wing of the estate, illuminating the chaos of creation. Lia stood before a massive canvas, charcoal streaking her brow, her focus absolute. She wasn't painting cages anymore. She was painting thrones, abstract, powerful, sometimes violent, but always shared. From my seat at the sleek marble table where I reviewed international ledgers, I watched her, just as I did every afternoon. The arrangement was a compromise that had somehow become the foundation of our stability. I worked, and she worked, in shared proximity. I needed her near. Her presence was the only thing that kept the steel in my soul from freezing completely. I smiled, a rare, genuine curve of my lips that I only allowed when she wasn't looking. The shy waitress who once feared my shadow was now the architect of my life. She was no longer just Mrs. Volkov. She was the silent power behind the man the world feared. The new security system for the South American division is excessive, Cian, she stated, not turning around, her voice calm. The budget is off by 18%, and the hardware specialist is a first cousin to a known rival. I told Dante to vet his family, not his friends. I closed the folder, impressed as always. You looked at the budget for a subsidiary you don't even manage? She finally turned, holding a dusty hand up in mock surrender. I can't help it. The numbers are a kind of rhythm, and that little line item for international consulting was far too clean. You need to hire messier people if you want to be surprised. You're predictable, darling. Banter. It was the language of our love, the constant push and pull that kept the air between us charged. And you, my love, are a menace, I replied, rising and walking over to her. I took the charcoal from her hand, my fingers brushing hers. The contact still sent a familiar, satisfying jolt of sizzling, hot chemistry through me. You are supposed to be sketching flowers, not dismantling my financial shields. Flowers are boring, she teased, leaning back into my chest as I wrapped my arms around her waist. But exposing your vulnerabilities, that's art. I kissed the top of her head, the scent of turpentine and jasmine a unique and intoxicating mix. The emotional depth of our life wasn't found in grand gestures. It was found here, in the quiet, shared space where the lines between wife, artist, and strategic advisor blurred completely. Salvatore Costa was long gone, his betrayal having earned him a lonely exile in the frozen north. The treaty he tried to break had been reforged by his daughter into an empire more powerful than he could ever imagine. Lia had burned the bridge, and she never looked back. That evening, we were forced to host a celebratory dinner for the council families, solidifying a major acquisition. It was a formal affair, complete with white gloves, endless courses, and the inevitable, stifling formality that I loathed. Lia, however, thrived on the stage. She wore a gown of crimson silk, the black diamond ring, my second ring, the reckoning ring, gleaming fiercely on her finger. She moved through the room with a practiced, absolute grace, offering polite smiles and devastatingly shrewd comments. During the toasts, she was perfect. She raised her glass, her voice clear, to the stability of our families and to the strength that comes from unity. May your partners be as sharp and as loyal as mine. It was a subtle, brilliant reminder of her history, her choice, and her absolute authority. Later, while circulating through the guests, I found myself cornered by Domenico Ricci, the younger brother of the man Lia had once served coffee to. He was sweating despite the cool air. "Signor Volkov," Ricci stammered. "Mrs. Volkov is formidable. We were just speaking about her new gallery show. The Gilded Chaos, quite striking, very powerful." "She is a powerful woman," I agreed, my gaze possessive as it tracked Lia across the room, where she was calmly discussing market share with two rival bosses. "She runs the house well," Ricci continued awkwardly. "We heard she even manages your private security contracts." I gave him a chilling smile. "She manages much more than that, Ricci. My wife is the reason I am always one step ahead. She is the only person who sees the chaos coming before it arrives." I watched Lia, and she caught my eye. She gave me a tiny, secretive wink, a flash of the teasing personality I had grown to crave. It was a silent acknowledgement. "We are playing them, Cian, and we are winning." The last guest departed near midnight. The house fell into its familiar, expensive silence. I found Lia by the main staircase, kicking off her impossibly high heels. "Did I do well, darling?" she asked, her voice laced with exhaustion and a familiar playful challenge. "You were perfect," I confirmed, scooping her up into my arms. "You commanded the room. The acquisition is sealed. Salvatore's old territories are finally absorbed. We are untouchable." I carried her to the master chamber, the connecting door, now used more than the main one, standing wide open. I set her down gently. "You know," she mused, unzipping her gown slowly, revealing the curve of her back. "We have the perfect life. Wealth, power, shared danger, and incredibly sizzling, hot chemistry." She smiled. The shy waitress long vanished, replaced by a confident, alluring queen. But sometimes, I miss the chaos. I stepped closer, my hands going to her waist. "What chaos, Lia? The kind that makes you drop a tray?" "No," she breathed, her hands sliding up my chest, undoing my tie with an agonizing slowness. "The kind where we didn't know if we were going to survive the next 5 minutes. The sheer, intoxicating risk of you." The high sexual tension we'd started with had matured into a deep, comforting intimacy, but the capacity for fire remained. I captured her mouth in a deep, possessive kiss, a familiar and necessary reminder that the risk of us was still very much alive. "My love," I whispered against her lips, pulling her tight against me. "I am a powerful man. I can create chaos whenever you need it." She laughed, a full, genuine, beautiful sound that echoed in the silence of the room. "I know you can, Cian. But a true queen doesn't wait for her king to create the chaos. She just needs the right canvas." We spent the rest of the night proving that the greatest pleasure in life was not in ruling an empire, but in ruling each other. Our marriage, built on a lie and secured by violence, was now an absolute truth. A partnership of equals, a shared throne, and a love story that began when they laughed at the shy waitress, never realizing she held the true power in her hands.